All righty. You saw the question. You know it's coming. What do all of these buildings have in common?
They both serve as a religious space and a gathering place?
They all serve as a space for gathering and for religion, and they're all temples, which is another way of saying that they all have a religious function. They do all have entrances on the short side. They do. That is true. And what else? They are not individual buildings, correct. They are public, sort of public use structures. One more thing. Staring at them won't tell you. Thinking about them might, though. What are the three big categories of life that we've been examining in this class via material remains? They are all religious spaces. Yeah, that's okay. You're correct. They are all religious spaces. What are the three big categories we've been looking at? Religious life, private life, administrative or civic. Now, what else do all these three have in common? They are single purpose. Hold that thought. We're going to spend the next half an hour, 40 minutes or so, looking at one sanctuary over about 700 years. Almost the entirety of the classical experience, the classical era. It is a sanctuary whose plan you have on your handout, located right here in the east, in the border between modern-day Israel, Syria, and Lebanon. It's right on the edge of all three, although its modern political home today is Israel. It is a sanctuary originally to the Greek deity Pan. And it was already extant when Rome controlled only the Italic Peninsula, and the Hellenistic kings controlled the entirety of the East, the Ptolemies down here in Egypt, and the Seleucids up here in Asia. So shortly after the time of Alexander the Great, this sanctuary was founded. In other words, around the time that people were living at this site, which you may recall back in sunnier days in October, we studied. And in fact, that sanctuary that we're about to look at is located right about here, just in the northern part of the valley that this site and several others like it are located. The sanctuary of Pan is in a pretty dramatic natural setting, which befits Pan, who was a nature god. He was that rambunctious half goat, half man. You may recall him from the Slipper Slapper sculpture, where Aphrodite is trying to whack him and he's trying to get at her from Delos, the sculpture that was found on Delos. Pan is a god who likes the open spaces, he likes the outdoors, he likes dramatic vistas, and all of those are present in abundance at this site. There is a huge cliff of a big mountain, Mount Hermon, and below the cliff springs one of the sources of the Jordan River. So this is an abundant, perennial water source that is always cascading out from beneath this mountain. And in the face of the cliff is a huge natural cave. So this looks to be an environment very suitable for wild nature deity. And when the Ptolemies, the successors to Alexander the Great who controlled Egypt, were in charge of this area, they established a sanctuary to the god Pan here at this spot, and people who lived in the vicinity began coming to the sanctuary regularly to make offerings. We have no structural remains from the Hellenistic period. All the remains are fragments of pottery from inside the cave. You're now inside the cave. And scattered around on the rocky terrain outside of the cave. And so it's only from the finds. We have no literary sources about this sanctuary other than the occasional simple topographical reference to it. But we have no information about what happened here. We don't know from any ancient source who came to worship, and we don't know what they did from anybody describing it. The only evidence we have are the finds. The only evidence we have is the archaeology. For 700 to 800 years of worship and activity, we have to figure it out from the material remains. So what happened here in the Hellenistic period? Well, the material remains comprise cooking pots and tableware. These exact examples, which you've seen before, come from Tel Anafah, but fragments exactly like these are found at the sanctuary. For about 200 years of activity at the sanctuary in the 3rd and 2nd into the early 1st centuries BCE, there are about 121 actually exactly, fragments of table vessels, almost an identical number of cooking vessels, and hardly anything else. A few fragments of jars, a couple, 7 fragments of lamps, and that's it. What are people doing at the sanctuary? How is this place being used? I'm going to ask you this question for every single phase, and every time I ask you, you need to have a little chat. So, this is the first one. What's going on at the sanctuary? This is the evidence.
So there's 121 fragments, not 121 actual vessels?
Well, there probably were about 121 actual vessels.
Okay, because I'm guessing, because 2 of the fragments could have been from the same.
Right. But I'm the person who studied it all and published it, and I looked for all possible joins.
Gotcha.
So
Okay.
you're very right, though. I mean, normally that would exactly be a correct question.
Okay.
But there were relatively few, and so I could see if they were parts of the same thing or not.
I see.
All right. What do you think?
Maybe like a festival, like a sacrifice.
Feasting. Because
Many people festivals, not much else. There's few storage things, so it's like a short-term event.
so a short-term event, something to do with food because there are cooking vessels, something to do with dining because there are table vessels, but not anything that's prolonged because there's no pottery that would allow people to support themselves if they stayed here for a while, right? No storage vessels. Over the course of 200 years, this is not an enormous quantity of vessels. So if these were evidence of some kind of annual festival, something organized, we would expect a lot more pottery. We would expect a lot more material. This is a relatively small amount of material for a relatively long period of time. So it suggests exactly those activities, but not on any kind of systematic, organized fashion. In fact, it suggests something like periodic visits and picnics. You would have been right. Which is very similar to what people do at the site today. Although today you're helped by the fact that the Israel Antiquities Authority has a booth right about here where you can buy, ice cream and beer and stuff. Picnic tables, right, picnic tables. But as the only place with a natural perennial spring for quite a distance, this and a very nice dramatic vista and shade from the trees, this is a logical spot to enjoy yourself, to go. And when we talk about religion in antiquity, sometimes this is all we're talking about. You're in a place which you acknowledge is in the presence of some kind of force outside of you, larger than you. The Greeks and the Romans gave those forces names. Lots of different names for lots of different gods who represented lots of different spheres of the world. Pan is one of the nature spheres. It doesn't necessarily mean prayer. It doesn't mean liturgy. It doesn't necessarily even mean sacrifice. It doesn't need to mean any of that. And that's the evidence we have for a couple of hundred years. In the time of Augustus, the sanctuary is here. A new structure is built in front of the cave. The first outside structure that's constructed. You see the side wall of this structure here in front of the cave. Here's the cave, and this is the building that was erected in front of it. This building was constructed in honor of Augustus by the man who was the king of this region at that time, Herod the Great. Probably around 20 BCE. Herod the Great. He built a little temple right in front of the cave. In fact, it probably functioned as a kind of entry into the cave. That is, not blocking access, but making a sort of combination temple and portal that would allow people to view or enter the cave. It magnified and elaborated what had been a completely natural setting. Herod dies in the year 4 BCE, and One of his sons, Herod Philip, is granted in the will the territory that is today essentially the modern Golan Heights. And he establishes for himself a capital city at the site of the sanctuary. There had been no city here. There'd only been this rural sanctuary on the outskirts of the Hula Valley. Herod Philip needed a city. He needed a capital. There were no cities in any of the part of the territory that he inherited, and so in front of the mountain and the cave here in this valley, he established a new city, which he named both after Augustus Caesar and himself. So he called the city Caesarea Philippi. When he founded his new city, he made a nice little addition, a little structural addition to the sanctuary. Because Dad had built a building that essentially covered up the cave so that anybody who had heard about the cave and came to the sanctuary might have wondered, where's the cave? There's supposed to be a cave here. I've heard it's really famous. It's really big. It's really impressive. So Herod Philip built adjacent to the cave, here's the mouth of the cave, a fake cave. A little cave right here carved into the rock wall. And then in front of the cave is an open-air court. That's the way it looked when we excavated it, and that's the way it looks today. If you go, you can see people lounging about in the cave. So you have to imagine the temple here in front of the original cave, and then this little fake cave and an open-air court. No other buildings yet exist on the terrace here. So you have to imagine trees and shrubs and the water coming down. We have a couple modest buildings, and we have a city immediately below the site. Now what you all want to know is, what happens at the sanctuary? Now we know what it looked like. What happens in this period? Again, the only evidence are the finds, and the only finds are pottery. We have cooking vessels, table vessels, continuing, but we also have a whole bunch of these. You know what these are? Are they?
They look like the things that we use today.
Oh, no. They're about the size of my hand, or maybe a little bit bigger. Not lamp holders. Lamps. Yeah, this is a lamp. This is a lamp. Here's how it worked. You poured oil in, and it held oil in here, and you threaded a wick out the nozzle, and then you lit it. And then it would burn. For about how long would a lamp burn like this? Dan did a great experiment this summer with replica lamps.
For about an ounce of olive oil, about 50 to 60 minutes.
Very nice. And it would give the same amount of light as? There you go. About 2 candles. Okay. We have almost 150 table vessels, about 130 cooking vessels, and now, instead of having 7 lamps from about 200 years, we have almost 150 lamps for a period of about 50 years. What's going on at the sanctuary of Pan in the time of Augustus and Herod the Great? Talk, talk, talk. Are you talking to me? What's the question? Oh, there's about 20.
Tuesday, is that a different handout than Tuesday?
Mhm.
Oh, thank you.
All right. What do you think's going on? Oh, so in other words, one possibility is that the lamps go directly with the tables and cooking vessels, and the activity is at night when you need light. That's possible. That's possible. But we don't need to see these, all of these as part and parcel of group activities. So yes, that is one possible explanation.
They could be giving tours of the cave, lighting candles.
They could be. They could be. They could be. Although I have to say that these are not found in the cave. They're found swept over the edge of the terrace. So there was activity on the terrace, and this is the remnant of that activity. And then, as people came and debris was swept away, this was part of that debris that was swept away. So we found all of these fragments in rock crevices, sort of on the edge of the terrace. If they had been touring people around in the cave, which is a fabulous idea, and it really is spookiola in there, then I would think that we would find the lamps inside there, but we didn't. Which, of course, makes you remember how important it is to know the context of where things are found.
Yeah, but if you go into a dark cave with a lamp, you're probably going to want to walk out with the lamp as well.
That's true. That's true. That's true. That's true. You're right. Could be that. In comparison with what was going on in the Hellenistic period, casual visits, picnics, does the evidence suggest that that kind of activity continues or not?
I'd say continues because it continues because you don't have more of the table and cooking vessels, you just have more lamps. So it's almost like the lamp activity is in addition to the occasional picnic. And the lamps actually kind of remind me of since they don't last very long and they're not super bright.
Yeah, right. So did y'all hear that? So they're not really a huge increase in table vessels and cooking vessels. And there's something else interesting. They're almost the same number, just like before. They're so close a number that does suggest that they go together. So that kind of activity, picnicking, visiting, hanging out on the terrace, can continue. The lamps are small and casual.
How many storage vessels are there?
Oh, there's about 20. The lamps are small and casual. They're a kind of, what you can do with them is make a fast dedication. What's the single biggest change to occur in the environs of the sanctuary in this era? People are living right here now. There's a town here now where there was no town before. So before, if you came here, you had to make a little trip. It was an investment of time. You would spend the day. You wouldn't come all the way here with your food and your drink and then turn around and go home again right away. But now you can visit the sanctuary quickly because you live right here in the vicinity. And so it's possible that this huge increase in lamp dedications is a reflection of an increase of individual people coming quickly and making a small dedication at the sanctuary. You know, pottery is cheap. You could think that what that means is that we shouldn't pay very much attention to it. But what I think it means is that it's a reflection of regular folks. It's the people who couldn't afford something big and fancy. It's not the elite who give this sort of gift. It's just, as in the analogy just presented, it's like a votive candle. When you go into a Greek Orthodox church, and you are invited to light a candle at the very beginning and put it in a little holder. These are like that. This is an indication of regular people regularly visiting the sanctuary in this part of its life. Another 100 years, lots of activity in the Roman Empire. Trajan is emperor in the early 2nd century CE. And the sanctuary is still going strong. By now, construction increases along the terrace. So the cave is here, and the false cave is here, and with its open court, the false cave in the cliff. And now we have this large building added to the terrace. And here it is. So, cave, building to Augustus, false cave and open court, and a new temple probably dedicated to Zeus. We have an inscription that suggests that it's dedicated to Zeus and perhaps Pan as well. So, in the manner of most sanctuaries in the classical world, more than one deity can be accommodated here with no problem. The space is sacred. The deities don't tend to be too territorial, at least in the conception that people of classical antiquity had about them. They were sharers. They shared their space. The sanctuary is beginning to look pretty fancy. 2 large buildings. Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering, do you think the cave or the natural cave is actually visible over the top of the first temple, or is it just depicted like that?
We think it was visible. We can tell from the size of the footings of this building about how high it must have been. We can tell the proportions, and the cave is really huge. So it's very unlikely that the building completely covered the opening to the cave. Yeah, good question. Throughout the 2nd century, now we have, who's this? Recognize this emperor? Thank you. Good job. And life at the sanctuary continues. Next to the new temple, another open-air court with niches carved in the rock face, and more niches carved in the rock face near the false cave now. And inside these niches, almost certainly sculpture. We start to find marble sculpture. It's been imported, the marble, and probably actually the finished sculpture, imported from other parts of the empire. Here you see heads of various deities. This, we have about 10 examples of these. It's a hand holding pipes, pan-played pipes. We call them pan pipes. And so there must have been some votive offerings of either little sculptures of Pan or just perhaps hands holding pipes, because that's what we have fragments of. These kind of dedications would have been given by individuals. They would have been given by individuals who had a certain amount of money. Imported, carved marble sculpture is not a gift that just anybody could afford. The niches that are carved into the rock face have inscriptions that go with them. So in some cases, we've got the names of individuals who made dedications like these. In this era, the 2nd and the early 3rd century CE, we have, so for about 100 years or so, we've got 1 cooking vessel, 18 table vessels, and 32 lamps. What's going on at the sanctuary? What's the question?
How many of like the sculpture heads were there?
Oh, how much sculpture? There's about 30 pieces.
Okay.
What do you think's going on at the sanctuary? Mhm. The cooking ritual, so any activity where people hang out and make a meal stopped. That seems absolutely clear. I mean, there's nothing to cook with anymore. And you can understand why that would be. There's very little room left on the terrace. It's no longer an open air spot. The terrace is being filled in with buildings. And then what else did you say after that?
Oh, I just said that the lamps died out.
The lamps died out too. What do you make of that? There had been 141, and now there are 32, for about a 100-year period. For a 100-year period. That's not even one lamp a year.
People stopped going in at night, or they didn't have as big a festival at night.
People stop going in at night, or even at all. There's no evidence that the site is restricted. It's completely open. What do you make of the 18 table vessels? If people aren't eating, what are these doing here?
I would say that it would be something like I feel like that the lamps died out and that people were either more wealthy or the more wealthy were the only ones going there because of all the little marble statues. And this at the same time weren't food offerings kind of a popular choice, so they would bring like a plate of fruit and leave it at the sanctuary for the gods kind of idea. It would explain why there are very few table vessels because they weren't actually there to be eaten or they weren't going in groups to have picnics. It was more of a, I'm gonna stop by the sanctuary to eat my little marble statue, give an apple or a pear, make a prayer, and go back to work kind of concept as opposed to go and have a picnic and enjoy the fruit.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Table vessels frequently are found in sanctuaries as offerings in and of themselves or as the conveyor of a food offering. And I agree with everything you said, except for one point where you said you'd bring your marble sculpture and your fruit offering. I think those would be two different people. A rich person who could dedicate something like this, and then all the rest of us who don't have that much money but want to visit the sanctuary site and make an offering. These few vessels tell us that some few people did, but not very many. That this became a place for elite showing off and not a place for regular people to gather, stay, dine, worship, whatever.
I was just going to say, could it be that the city had gotten so big and so close that people didn't need to bring anything with them? They could just go and visit every year?
People didn't, so in other words, people could have been visiting and not leaving any sort of offering at all, and then we wouldn't have any evidence for their visits?
Yeah, but then what she said made more sense.
Oh, okay. It's always possible. I mean, yeah, absolutely. It was not a requirement when you visited a sanctuary to make an offering. So this is not to say that, 32 plus 18 plus 1, whatever that is the total number of regular folks who visited the sanctuary. But the abrupt decline suggests that there are many fewer people. And it's not actually that there are so many wealthy people. It's just that some wealthy people have kind of adopted this as a place to show off part of their wealth by making a dedication. In the 4th and 5th centuries CE, the sanctuary of Pan continued to be a thriving, visited pagan sanctuary. And in this, it is not too different from most of the sanctuaries that existed in the classical world. The advent of Constantine and Christianity did not mean that every single pagan sanctuary shut down. Doors are closed, no admission. That's not the way it worked at all. For a couple of hundred years, there was room for everybody. However you believed and worshipped, there was a place where you could be accommodated. Sanctuaries such as the Sanctuary of Pan continued to receive visitors and worshipers. At the edge of the terrace now, so we've got, if you look at your plan, you've got the cave, and you've got the open court, and you've got the Temple of Zeus, then you've got another open court, and then at the far edge of the sanctuary, a little street was built, and a building above it, right up against the cliff face, and below it, a little building with an apse. You can see some folks in here for helpful scale. Show that the priests, the city fathers, whoever it was who oversaw construction and use of the sanctuary, continued to invest money in it, continued to expand and beautify it, create more areas for people to come and visit and worship. So by the middle of the 2nd century CE, the time of Trajan and Hadrian, here's what the sanctuary looked like. But in the time of Constantine and his successors in the 4th century, this is what the sanctuary looked like. So it had this additional open court, and then this little building above the street, and then the apsidal building just below the street, here, closer to the edge of the terrace. And here are the ceramic finds from this era, the 4th and the 5th century. 607 cooking vessels, 314 table vessels, and 2,930 lamp fragments. Or actually, lamps. And this is what they look like. They look like your 1st grade art project with clay, where somebody said you can make, this doesn't actually probably happen anymore in our newly legislated, politically correct world, but when I was in 1st grade, we all made ashtrays. That just goes to show you how times have changed. Honest to God. And this is what they look like. You took your little clay and you went, you're that was it. And what these are tiny, tiny little saucer lamps. They're maybe 6 inches across at the top, and they are each one single use. See that right there? That's where the wick was briefly lit. So almost 3,000 of these quite simple little objects, plus the rest of this. What in the time of the rise of Christianity is going on at the Sanctuary of Pan? What do you think? don't think they're reading exactly. Could anybody read from the light of one of these things? Dan says no. He's our expert. What's going on? Yeah, they could be. That's probably what they are. Yeah, the lamps in and of themselves are almost certainly individual offerings. More regular people, more individual people. A lot more. A tremendously increased number of plain folks. The tables have kind of turned in terms of who the worshipers are at the sanctuary. It's become less a place for display and more, again, a place for regular people to go. Well, it's probably about 150 years. By the middle of the 5th century, the sanctuary is probably on the decline. Oh, that's an interesting idea, kind of like a church supper. That is an interesting idea. So let me give you some more information about the cooking vessels. We have them mostly inside that back building, the one that's above the street. And they have no evidence that they've ever been used. There's no burning on the bottom of any of them. Whereas the cooking vessel fragments that we have from the Hellenistic and early Roman periods were clearly used. They have burning on them. What do you think? What do you think about the cooking and the dining vessels? Most. What do you think? What's the point of having a cooking vessel if it's never been used? That is an interesting question, huh? What do you think?
Sacrifice, or I can't even remember the word now. An offering.
An offering, yeah, to make an offering. So like the example of bringing fruit or something on a table vessel, the cooking vessel also would be an offering. A vessel which is a little bit less fancy even than the table vessel. So also you want to look at the discrepancy in these numbers. Twice as many cooking vessels as table vessels, whereas back in the period where we were speculating that people were hanging out, having a picnic, eating, the number of cooking vessels and table vessels were just about the same. No. They're the sort of vessels that could have held water, they could have held wine, they could have held grain. Same sort of vessels was used for all of them, and we didn't do residue analysis on them, so I can't say. Good question. Too bad that we did not.
Possible that some of the lands could have come from construction of buildings, toward.
The question is, could some of the lamps have been for workers to use when they were working? People didn't work at night. People lived by the light of the sun. When the sun went down, work stopped. Those were the days. And these lamps would not have provided enough light for something like that, and they weren't used that much. As you can tell, they were just used very, very quickly and casually. So this tells us that there is a real resurgence in activity here in the 4th and early 5th centuries here at this pagan sanctuary when, let me tell you, in the city of Caesarea Philippi are at least 2 churches and a bishop. So it's not as if Christianity hasn't reached to this sector of the world. It has. There are churches throughout the region, small and large.
If there were 2 churches in the town, were there any other paganistic temples or anything like that, or was the sanctuary pretty much it?
There is another classical temple, so a pagan temple on the outskirts of the city that has been excavated. And it is likely that there were shrines elsewhere in the city, but the city proper hasn't really been fully explored, so just the city center. So we don't know about that. But there was more than one pagan shrine in the environs. And actually, not too far from here is another Roman temple on the other side of the Hula Valley. So, this pagan sanctuary continues to thrive through the 5th century CE, when the evidence shows that it is gradually abandoned. That is the trajectory of that story. There is the rise of elite dedication and then the fall off of it, or it's replaced again by an upsurge in regular folks coming to use the sanctuary. But those folks don't spend very much time there anymore. It's a far cry from when the sanctuary was a place where people could come and spend the day, have a picnic, rest, and completely absorb the experience. It's not like that anymore. Now it's a fast visit with a quick and cheap dedication and then gone and out the door. It's more people, but each of those people are less involved. In the same part of the world is another site with some interesting religious monuments, and we are going to go there now. And that is the site in modern-day southern Jordan of Petra. If you go to Petra today, you find this very rugged landscape, desert landscape. This is the world of T.E. Lawrence of Arabia. And it was in this very, very harsh region that a peoples whom we know of from antiquity called the Nabataeans lived. The Nabataeans are spelled Nabataeans. Nabataeans. Should I spell it again? Okay. If you go to Petra, this is how you get in. Through a long, modified, but originally natural crevice in this landscape called the Sikh. Here's the beginning of the Sikh. Here's the road that the Sikh was paved in the 1st century BCE, so shortly before the time of Augustus. It's long. It's over a kilometer, 1.2 kilometers long. As you walk through, you alternate between somewhat wider and somewhat narrower spaces, and eventually, as you get towards the end, you glimpse something cut into the rock face as you're coming to the end, and when you emerge, this is what you see. Does this look familiar to any of you? Back when everybody saw Indiana Jones, the first couple of times that I showed this slide, the first couple of years after that came out, the entire class made a collective gasp when I would put this image on the screen. It was fantastic. You guys are also over it now. It's boring. Thank you. So in Indiana Jones, don't they go in and then there's just lots and lots and lots of activity back here? but in real life, there's one single small chamber. It's all facade. It's all facade. This is a tomb facade. Because the Nabataeans used Petra, they were a nomadic people and they were traders, but they used Petra as a kind of early religious and then eventually civic center, and people had their bodies sent back here to be buried, and the richer and more impressive you were, the larger and more impressive your burial was. And this is probably the facade of the burial place of one of the Nabataean kings. If you walk down the street from the Khazaneh, from the treasury that you just saw, you pass a theater. Petra became a city, and as it became a city, it acquired some of the structures that a classical city had, like entertainment buildings, such as this theater. And when you continue down the street from the theater and then turn a corner, you can see more rock-cut tombs up here on the cliff. And you come down onto a long colonnaded street, just like Jerusalem, a cardo, a street with columns lining both sides and public and religious buildings on either side of the cardo. So we're in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE here. On one side of the cardo, and here you see it, again, with the entrance gate to the city right here, there's a huge temple with double colonnaded courts on either side, a temple to some pagan deity, we don't know who exactly. There's another temple down here a ways, and a big civic center here, so lots of civic buildings. Here's the plan now you're looking at. Here's the cardo. That great big temple is here. That other temple down the way is here. The garden and other civic buildings are here. So the cardo, temple, temple, temple. And beginning in the 4th century CE, 1, 2, 3 churches were added to the city's landscape. We're going to look at this church right here. Here it is an aerial view. It has a plan very similar to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You can call this the North Church at Petra, the Petra North Church. Large center hall, 2 long wings on either side. Beautiful mosaics cover the floors. Here's the plan. Similar to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there's a large gathering space in the front, an atrium, as classical sanctuaries have regularly. But you see also that attached to the church are a couple of subsidiary rooms, both in the front and on the side. And here is this room in the back. And in 1993, when the American Council of Oriental Research was excavating this church and this room, they found documents that had been burned and charred, rolled up, but when they were very, very carefully unrolled, they could be read. There are 152 papyrus rolls, 8.5 meters long, for the most part apiece, all translatable. What do you think these documents held. What do you think? What's a possibility? An early version of the Bible. What's another possibility? Church business. What's another possibility?
Like death or birth records, because it was an area where many people were sent back to have their bodies buried and be a record of who was buried where and when.
Death and birth records. What's another idea?
Just how, like, civil information, the documents is talking about.
So not anything to do with the church.
Maybe something to do with the government, like the church.
Ah.
It also could be like regulations on how to worship or like an early version of like the catechism or whatever the equivalent is of like what you want certain days or do.
So like a church calendar kind of a thing.
And then like worship
And behavior in conjunction with worship.
Since they were burned and not preserved, maybe they were being teachings.
Oh, well, they're burned by accident. It wasn't on purpose.
That I like.
Well, in the last 15 years, the documents have all been translated. They date to the very end of the 6th century CE, middle to the end of the 6th century CE. There are no versions of the Bible. There are no church-state records. There are no prayers or liturgies or calendars of a religious nature. In fact, there's nothing that has anything to do with the church at all. All the documents are mundane civic documents. Contracts, dowries, dowry marriage contracts, rental leases, tax records. What does this remind you of? What's this? Linear B. From where? Actually, it's from Mycenae, but same idea. The last time we saw this phenomenon was in the late Bronze Age in Greece. You know, when we think about history and we learn about it, we think of it as a line, an arrow, a single direction. But it's not really like that. It's more like a big circle. Not the same circle. We don't always get back to exactly where we started, but more like a spiral. The late Bronze Age, the era of the Mycenaean megara, the palaces, and the kings, was an era of strict hierarchy where individual people didn't have any power And all facets of the social contract, administrative, civic, which wasn't really a concept in the late Bronze Age, and cosmic, religious, were held by, controlled by, and through individuals. And they had places with all of those responsibilities combined. The story of classical antiquity, the story we've unraveled all semester here, has been the story of people slowly taking the parts apart, making them separate. First, extracting religious worship from the abode of and the control of an individual, and making it part of a community endeavor disconnected from the place where the elite lived. The next step was conceptualizing and then making a space, a physical space for government. That too was disconnected from any one individual and disconnected from religious worship. The birth of civic space is a classical invention. And individuals could and were inspired to try to elevate themselves in the Hellenistic era by building richer houses, and in the Roman era as well, because there was a lot of room in the private sphere. It wasn't a threat to do that. You couldn't be scaring off the leader because the leaders were the civic structure. That was separated from how private individuals carried themselves. And for about 1,000 years, that's the way the world was. And then, piece by piece, it began to come together again. Not at one point, not in one fell swoop. At Constantinople, where in Constantine's new conception, the figure of the emperor is central and controls the civic and the religious infrastructure. At the Piazza Armerina, where a private individual can now provide the kind of services that before the civic body provided. And finally, here at Petra, where we can see that the church and the state, so long firmly separated, have joined back up together. From the late Bronze Age Megara, it takes about 1,000 years to get to the Petra Church. And once we get to that point, it's not that many more steps to the world of the Middle Ages. And it took another about, half a millennium before the parts got pried apart again. In that way, the world we live in now is a new take on the classical world. It's not a continuation of the Middle Ages. We're back at that part of the circle that in a lot of ways we've been studying all semester. And the big question that you might want to consider is, what direction are we going in? Have a great weekend. See you Tuesday.